Hotep, and welcome, Morgan, for the Egyptian Magic podcast. And this episode, I'm returning to the issue of the god Thoth, or Jehuti in the Egyptian tongue, as an approximation. It's a topic I've talked about a few times, but there's some new things to explore, so I thought I'd share that with you now. I know, as I say, I've talked a lot about Thoth. If you look at episode 7 in the podcast series, there's quite a long piece there exploring different material to do with Thoth in general, so have a look at that. I'll probably cross paths with that a little bit, and this is not going to be the final adventure with Thoth. There's always a lot to say with such an important god, and we're bound to come back to it. So Thoth is a god of magic. Not necessarily the god of magic, although in some ways you could argue that, but certainly an important, if not the most important, of the gods of magic. And also, not surprisingly, very much associated with writing and the hieroglyphic script, which is a tool that he devised or simplified. It's sometimes said Ptah actually created the hieroglyphs, and Ptah and Thoth do have a relationship as well, and Thoth actually wrote them down, and there's an argument that in the process of writing them down he kind of rationalized them as well. It's sometimes said that in general, in historical terms, the creation of the alphabet is itself an expression of magic, perhaps even channeled from the kind of certain magical states to do, sometimes say, for instance, looking at the stars lends itself to the idea of graphic patterns that might represent certain ideas. So not surprisingly, anything that Thoth says in terms of the script of the records of ancient Egypt, anything that Thoth says by definition will be considered as a magical spell. And again, the use of the term spell shows how important and how difficult it is to get away from talking about magic without talking about language and spelling and words and their meaning. These things are inextricably linked in magic. Words and magic are very, very much connected, as we know. And indeed, there is something unique about the way we as humans are able to form this complex flow of phonemes, the thing we call speech. Obviously, other creatures have, whether you call it, they don't have speech, but they have kind of noises that they make. Perhaps you could say they have a language, but the two things, much greater extent, obviously that's our uniqueness as a species, is the fact that language and speech are very special and very powerful things that we use. We change the world through our use of words. Thoth is usually depicted with a kind of human body, standard human body in the Egyptian tradition, with the head of the sacred ibex bird. And this is the most popular avatar of Thoth, the ibis. But he can also be depicted in other forms, especially as an ape or more as a baboon. And usually it's the whole baboon, which is the avatar of Thoth, rather than just the baboon's head, although in Egypt it's quite likely you'll find examples of everything. In the earlier podcast, I gave a lot of emphasis to an opening rite, which I called the Abydos arrangement, and also to a sevenfold rite which flows from this, which I've now calling the Sefket, because Sefket is the Egyptian word for 7. And also it's this epithet of, you can sort of take the number 7 and personify it as the goddess Sheshat, whose name actually means female scribe. So we're back to words and their personification again. And she is shown with a 7-rayed headdress, 7 again, actually as her crown. And she is related to Thoth. She's the daughter of Thoth and another important goddess, the goddess Mart. So you have a kind of interesting triad there of Sheshat, the female scribe, Thoth, the god of magic, and Mart, the kind of aim of magic in a way, the divine order or equipoise of the cosmos, which all gods and all magic aims to maintain to some extent. So the Sheshat shares some of the elements, the features of the god Thoth, and they both are often shown holding this long measuring stick. I'll show a little picture of that, which is some sort of giant palm leaf with notches on it, which both she and Thoth used to keep a tally of things, to measure things, especially a tally of space and time. I should also say, I'll put a link up. I did an interview on Thoth with Debbie Elliott's podcast on YouTube, and I'll put the shortened link to that, or you can find it. You could DJ Elliott on YouTube and dig around in there somewhere, and you'll find an interview she did with me on Thoth. Okay, so going back to the Abydos arrangement, this is the thing where which starts before me in the east, or more or less before me in the east, Nephthys; behind me in the west, Isis; on my right hand in the south is Set; on my left hand in the north is Horus; above me shines the body of Nut; and below me extends the ground of Geb, the earth god; and in the center is the great hidden god, which I've sort of recited many times and discussed that. That particular part comes from a training manual, an ancient training manual for initiates known as Papyrus Salt, we call it that. And on the screen is a handy diagram which I've used many times from the blurry original, which shows the original symbolic arrangement of an institution called the House of Life, which is going to figure quite a lot in what I've got to say now. All of these diagrams, I read the bit from the Abydos arrangement from my kind of compendium that I've put together, which I call Egyptian Magic, a Spirited Guide, and this has got almost all the useful liturgy up to the point in which I wrote the book, and obviously supplementing this all the time. But it's certainly a good collection of the major liturgy that's useful to anybody really, but certainly what I tend to kind of fall back on for the work on the ritual cycle. Okay, and probably that diagram is in there. So I'm going to describe the diagram for you in some detail to try and make sense of it. The outer square of this image represents a building of some sort, an institute, what I call an institution, which has 4 doorways placed at each of the 4 cardinal directions. And then inside that building, I should say there's an outer line as well, which you might call a terminos, meaning the ultimate delineation of the sort of sacred space. So inside that is this large building represented with 4 doorways. And inside is another large oblong which contains an image you can see of the god Osiris, which in the opening as we use it in our particular arrangement, I refer to as the unknown god, mysterious god, if you like. And so then if you look below that square that represents the inner room, you can just about make out the hieroglyphs of the goddess Nephthys, which is bottom left, which shows a kind of pattern of a house, which is a name with some sort of offering bowl. The goddess Isis is bottom right and shown as the kind of royal throne, which is Aset is kind of her name comes from that. At the top of the same inner square, top left, is actually the god Thoth, which I kind of, for sectarian reasons, tend to kind of replace with the god Set, because I'm a kind of got a special relationship with Set, and Set and Thoth are often do get substituted for each other in various other pieces of old Egyptian ritual, that things that were done by Seth are often done by Thoth, because there's a relationship between them. Top right is the falcon, little representation of it, and that represents the god Horus. Above, in the center above the this inner square room, is the hieroglyph of the goddess Nut, or Nuit, the star goddess, and at the bottom is the hieroglyph for the god Geb, the earth god, which is actually a goose. Goose represents the name of the god Geb, and he's sometimes referred to as the old cackler. It's rather nice, presumably because of the goose. So the Sefket, or sevenfold ritual, then follows on from this and sort of amplifies it with words of power and mantras and all the rest. Just an old ritual. So one can see that already then there is a deep connection with the god Thoth in some very crucial rites of Egyptian magic, which, so there's not this deep connection is not so surprising when we consider that the whole House of Life is also a place in which scribes, people who do the writing and recording within the Egyptian tradition, which is very, very important, they have to be trained somewhere, and they're trained in this institution, which is represented by the diagram I'm still showing, which is the House of Life. So it's the training of scribes, which the idea of scribes may not, a scribe, someone who writes and makes records, may not initially appeal to you as being particularly glamorous, magical thing, but it actually is very, very central. More important than priests in a way are the people who write, and there's kind of like an intellectual class there. And their patron is the god Thoth, and they wear the mark of Thoth, and Thoth is very much to do with the god of scribes. And of course, his daughter Sheshat, her name means female scribe as well. So the whole complex is there. There are, as I say, various permutations or variations on what I just described, this arrangement. Some of them are very, very old indeed. The earliest could be that which comes from the pyramid text, actually from the massive stone coffin that is found within one of the early pyramids, that of Teti. So we might call this the primary ritual. This is the basic ritual, primary ritual of Egyptian magic and of Egyptian cosmology. And it includes the essence of all other rituals are kind of encoded in this deceptively simple rite, all leading to the idea of reconstitution and then re-manifestation, in a word, the kind of recreation of things. That's where it all leads to. The arrangement is well known from later papyri, from the House of Life, which I mentioned already, papyrus salt being a good example of that. And this was in its guise as an institution for the training of scribes. As I said, scribes were intellectuals, and they also form something which interests us a lot, the kind of rank and file of something that has only recently been rediscovered, the existence of mystery cults, of cults of mystery, of cults of magic, where people join these societies in the way in the modern world people kind of join a society or a group or a coven or whatever. In the ancient world, you have these mystery cults. Their existence and relationship to those to institutions in ancient Egypt is usually contested and not obvious. But they do exist, and the people who train tend to have to be literate, of course, because magic does involve quite a lot of intellectual activity. So the scribes, amongst the scribes themselves, who do their basic work, these other scribes who maybe become part of a secret mystery cult, and there are various buildings being discovered where their training takes place, all modeled on this house of life in one way or another. The other thing I wanted to mention, talking about these institutions, it's becoming increasingly clear that Egypt's later kings, sometimes known as the Nubian pharaohs or black pharaohs, instigated some sort of religious renaissance in Egypt. There you go, things did change. They kind of did a lot of revival of older ideas and reformulating. As they said they were reviving old ideas, at the same time they kind of recompiled them and added some new insights into them. And this is related to what the mystery cults might actually be doing. They develop a secret magical theology that is taught only to the specialist group. Mystery cults of some kind are likely from even before the Nubian which is the later time, and even the very earliest time. There probably were mystery cults then, but we know less about them because records are best known from this Nubian period. Thus, the House of Life was the ideal space, but also a real institution in which people, apart from learning how to read and write or do their work, were initiated and trained in the scribal arts, but also into the details of this secret magical cult, which might seem controversial, but more and more details of it keep emerging. King Tahakwa is someone to whom we will keep returning, because he seems to be quite sort of central. Certainly his monuments, the things that he commissioned, seem to relate quite a lot, several of them, to this mystery cult. He lived approximately 690 to 664 before the Common Era, which is the later period in the Egyptian timeline, which is extremely long. He was said to be one of the black pharaohs who ruled over Egypt for nearly a century, or one of the Nubian or Kushite pharaohs of Egypt, since for some people, this traditional representation of the 25th dynasty, which is what we're talking about as the black pharaohs, is contested and criticized by other scholars, not because on the basis that they weren't black, but because we're talking about southern origins, south being further into Africa, and other dynasties within the Egyptian tradition also had connections, deep connections with this south, what is now the Sudan, one way or another. So you can't just put it down to one dynasty. So that's why the idea of the black pharaohs is contested. But whatever way you look at it, this 25th dynasty, the Kushite pharaohs, when the people from the deep south ruled the whole of Egypt, and several of the monuments that he commissioned, as I say, encapsulate a new mystical theology, which is quite complex, and we've explored it a few times, and there's more of that coming. And there are several monuments into which I could digress, but I probably can't do that now and keep this within the time frame. This material is treated in much more detail in this book I'm working on now called Magick of the Sky. And I say, but I'm going to skip a lot of that now in the recording, but it is there in the book. Details on the monuments from Karnak and from Medinet Habu, and also from the Ashmolean in Oxford. I could also mention the relationship between Horus and Set that gave us Thoth in as their magical child in the first place. That's a very, very deep subject uh, that would be replete with a great deal of insight in what you might call very interesting thing of sexual magic, especially the mechanics of sexual magic, actually how you went about it, as discovered in our era by Aleister Crowley and Victor Neuberg and other golden couples. But ultimately stems from this mythological incident in ancient Egypt in between Horus and Set, giving rise to Thoth. It's all there. The actual details, important secret details, and this is in their mythology. But I say I've talked about that in some places, including a little book on sexual magic. But I'm going to skip over that for the podcast now and move on to another topic. And otherwise, I'd never finish. What I wanted to do is draw your attention to an important feature of this Nubian or Kushite Renaissance. And this is the apparent recreating of a book called the Book of Thoth. Which, of course, you're going to remember that Crowley chose the term the Book of Thoth for his tarot deck. And I'm sure if he was, I don't know actually if that was the first time it was ever referred to it. There may be other people who have used that term, and it's a term from ancient Egypt itself, but he's certainly one of the ones I know who used it to refer to a tarot deck. If you're interested in the origins of the tarot deck and my heretical, perhaps revolutionary take on the origins of those sorts of images from Egypt, do look at episode 12 of the podcast sequence, and I'm quite pleased with that and quite interesting thing, which is again about the origins of the modern tarot deck. So like many studying Egypt, my first recollection of the Book of Thoth comes from its appearance in a set of Egyptian folk stories where it functions as what we might call a MacGuffin. Thanks then to Kite for introducing me to this very useful term, the MacGuffin, which makes a sense of a lot of magical work. This is an object that provides a motivation that drives a story along. And in the first and second tales of Setni, which are written in Demotic being the Egyptian language, but also a more popular or vernacular form, as spoken by ordinary Egyptians who lived under the rule of the Ptolemies, who were the actually ethnically Greek pharaohs, although you wouldn't notice it, of later times. Anyway, this set of folk tales was doing a circulation, which are very, very interesting in their own right, and you can learn a lot of magic from them. And the thing that drives the story along is the quest of the characters to find the magical Book of Thoth, which keeps getting lost and rediscovered and then deliberately lost again. So it's a kind of ripping yarn, which we can learn a lot from, and a lot of Egyptian magic is taught in the form of folk stories, popular stories, rather than these kind of very highfalutin things. So was it a real book then, is the question. Perhaps the Nubian kings who once ruled the entire Nut Valley began before them and were driven out of Egypt to their southern homelands, where they remained as a vibrant culture for several centuries of the Common Era. Perhaps it was something that they recreated. Just to remind you that whilst all this interesting stuff is happening on a magical level, the Assyrians had actually defeated this character to Harqua at his last battle. He died soon afterwards, having got home. This is kind of Game of Thrones aspect of Egyptian culture, all these different empires competing with it. Macedonia and Alexander the Great, of course, then defeated the Assyrians, and that made room for the Ptolemaic dynasty. So all these things are happening relatively close together, and influencing each other. So it's a time of big political change, but also religious renaissance for the Egyptians for the last few centuries, of as long as the culture has. What is important for us in all this coming and going is the Book of Thoth. Was it just, as I say, a plot device in a late but very popular story, or could it have been a real book? Well, we have the answer to that now. A real book was first identified in the 1960s, which would have been Berlin manuscript B02, though it wasn't until 1995 that it was properly introduced, but only to specialists. And since 1995, R. Jasno and Carrie Theodore Zauzich have been steadily working on this. It's taken years, 30 years, quite hard to read, translating and revising it. Up until then, it had been a virtually unknown book, but it's becoming more and more known. As I say, it's reputed to be a very difficult task, this step-by-step process of understanding its significance and meaning. And happily, a popular version is now available under the title Conversations in the House of Life. And its existence, as with a lot of important academic books, is beginning to filter into the practitioner community, who are quite often early adopters of these sort of things. There's an excellent example, a reworking by Robert Anderson Plimmer, who's probably known to using the alternative title The Chamber of Darkness, published in 2020, which essentially is bringing out kind of how you might use this. So what is it, this book? Just in brief then, the Book of Thoth. What is it, and what sort of things are revealed in the House of Life? The important thing we learn from it is that it has an alternative title for the House of Life, which is The Chamber of Darkness, hence the title taken by Robert Anderson Plimmer for his kind of rendering of it. He used the alternative title, The Chamber of Darkness, which is a subterranean place of initiation, similar to several we've described before, including the Opet at Karnak, and several others built by this King Taharqa already mentioned. Unlike other important chambers and structures, it related, according to the translators now, to real activities and to rituals closely associated with the physical structure of the House of Life. And it recounts in very, very figurative language sometimes the experiences that you or the disciple might undergo as they're initiated into the House of Life. I say we've come across this sort of idea before in other things I've written, but also in the knowledge of the way the Egyptian magical religion works. The book is a dialogue, mostly between a disciple, who is called He Who Loves Knowledge, and a master, who is either meant as a senior adept, personifying or taking on the god form of Thoth again, and the related deities, or perhaps it could be viewed as a kind of somehow a dialogue with the actual god themselves, not mediated by a scribe acting as the adept. Early on in the dialogue, the disciple exclaims, this is line 15, "May I awaken in the chamber of darkness." So there's a kind of movement, as well as a mundane idea of rooms where you might sit around learning how to read and write. The whole structure has a kind of Gnostic quality to it, where things are arranged, different sort of rooms and movements. So there's a kind of geomantic element or theatre of memory at work here, because the adept, as they do this, are confronted by various doors and their gatekeepers, which is another very familiar idea from the Egyptian culture, that the house, as I say, acting as a theatre or theatre of memory and of initiation as the candidate moves through it. And there is, of course, a connection between this Book of Thoth and the Book of the Temple, and with classical Hermetic text, the Corpus Hermetica. And considering that the Hermetic dialogues, this is the location, the things that you find in the Hermetic dialogues, this is the kind of, you should think this is the location now of where those dialogues, Hermetic dialogues, would have taken place and what they are referring to constantly. So there's a great link between the Hermetic, Hermes being the Greek name for the god Thoth, so all to do with the Hermetic or mysteries of Thoth, and now we can connect them with an actual institution, which is the House of Life, and a book, the Book of Thoth, has given us all the missing links now to reconstruct the entire and work the Hermetic tradition, as it was called in later time. The Book of Thoth, as I say, has two main characters, the master and the disciple. The master's name is Heseret, which is also an epithet of the god Thoth, meaning he of Heseret, which is also the name of a necropolis, a burial ground near Hermopolis. There's Hermes again, which is the Greek name for the cult center of Thoth, and also his daughter, the goddess Sheshat, whose name, as I remind you, means female scribe. She is Thoth's daughter, as I said, by the goddess Mart. So the master is either Thoth himself or a scribe priest assuming the role of Thoth, as he asks the disciple a series of transformative questions that in a dialectical form that change their consciousness. Hence, a popular summary by the original translators is called Conversation in the House of Life. So it's a kind of dialectical conversation between 2 points of a sort that's become familiar to us, that survived within the magical tradition. One might expect the first thing to be mastered would be the knowledge of the Holy Script itself. And this is brought about by physical consumption. The eating magic, this theme of eating magic, of physical transfer of knowledge, is something we come back to again and again. It occurs in the fictional Book of Thoth, and in this operational version, the eating of things. The disciple is said to gain control, at least, over the hieroglyphs through their consumption. And this isn't a new theme either. It's something that goes back to the very earliest texts, where things like the cannibal hymn, you're gaining knowledge of something or their power by actually eating it in some way. The events that take place and described in the house must have happened over some sort of cycle. There are references to a series of ordeals or perhaps disciplines which need to be done in order to reach a final goal. There are various rules and taboos to be carried out, including the well-known avoidance of myrrh. Actually, I'm told that myrrh is used everywhere in Egyptian magic and religion, and in Egyptian temple liturgy. So, like with a lot of things, a good example where you can't quite take it on its face value, it seems unlikely that myrrh really would have been avoided in the House of Life. One possibility is that it's a particular type of myrrh, red myrrh, and because of red has Sethian associations, it may be Set kind of crops up a lot in one way or another within this Book of Thoth, but it may be some way of restricting or limiting or referencing the power of Set. Another important figure within this is the human, or Imhotep. Imhotep is kind of treated, or becomes a real person apparently, but becomes a kind of avatar or form of the god Thoth. You might say that from what we know of his history, he was the archetypal magician, being a human who had superhuman powers, or certainly in later times was treated as a god, and had a cult, and a kind of people assumed he probably started out as a god, but he seemed to be a human who was deified because of their vast skill, their vast knowledge. There's kind of Renaissance character, polymath. Imhotep was said to be the architect of the first of the great pyramids, that of Djoser at Saqqara. So that's one of the ways in which he's known. But as I say, a polymath with a great deal of medical and technical knowledge, which was miraculous in its way, and whose image continued to be worshipped and is part of Hermeticism as well. So let's finish this taster with a look at some of what I call the tantric or bodily magic elements within the Book of Thoth as it appears at first glance. As with all the best Egyptian magical books, gynecological knowledge, or metaphors, if you like, metaphors to do with reproduction, sex, and birth, are very, very common and abound and are encountered by the disciple as they follow their path. Sexual magic is mentioned, and as it is mentioned in a way in the Corpus Hermetica, perhaps not enough that you can't easily miss it or ignore it. An awareness of it was obviously important, even if you were going to downplay it or decenter it in some way. You have to know about it. It's always mentioned, and the fact that something is always mentioned makes you think it's something you really needed to know about. This one reads, "Even sex cannot compare with the scribal mysteries," which might seem strange to say that, kind of nerdy in a way, reading a good book is better than having sex. But I think the metaphor means that this type of knowledge that they're doing and the way they're going about it, there is something sexual in the process, something overwhelming, an exchange. This is also a big theme in the fictional version of the Setna cycle of folk tales, where sexuality and this kind of misuse of it as well seems to play a part, as is the kind of fluid transfer, the transfer of knowledge by eating and drinking certain types of fluids. It's a big theme there. Scribal knowledge, as I say, is said to be better than sex, or it attracts. There's something that attracts you like sexuality, and what is that? Right, on a level, it's this sort of someone explains it like the oxytocin, the substance of pleasure that is emerges in the process of sexuality, and also kind of breastfeeding and all the rest. There's something there. Yeah, there's a physical ecstatic element to this to sexuality, and to absorbing knowledge, right? There's a frisson, we might say, about certain types of Gnostic knowledge. Why would you say this in the context of, if not, as I say, to draw attention to the topic of sexuality in Sisters of Magic? You have to know it's there. It provides the important metaphor to what's going on. Again, another quote from the same book: "The mystery of the bedroom does not ensnare us as much as she who loves enchantment." So, which is Sheshat, a name of Sheshat, the daughter of Thoth. However much the mystery of this bedroom may attract, she's the ultimate, if you like. She is more than that, but why would you use that as a metaphor? She who loves enchantments, again, she ensnares the disciple, the sexuality. These are themes, right, which is difficult to work out that recur a lot in the text, right? And within alchemy and within Zosimus and later stuff that we've discussed. Have a look at the podcast I mentioned, 12, I think, on the Tarot for some unexpected traditions there. This sort of bittersweet element to this Gnostic trance that people are working with. And we may also be talking about sublimation of some way of sexual desire. That is the movement of it, not suppression, but the channeling of it to some higher aim. Or maybe it doesn't need channeling. We just need to open our eyes to the process that's going on. As I mentioned, gynecological images and models, which are central anyway to the Egyptian way of thinking, abound in this text. The one who loves knowledge, that a disciple, he said, "Let one command for me the words which give birth to prophets, that they may cause them to become pregnant within my flesh." This is not just flowery language. This is actually referring to the central process and model of Egyptian magic and alchemy, essentially, about returning to the source, becoming pregnant. The whole chamber of darkness, if you think about it, is in fact a metaphor for the human body. And the disciple is exploring this using techniques of internal pilgrimage, also sometimes perhaps path working, and scrying as another name for the similar sort of process. As I say, this image of nursing, that's breastfeeding, is also prominent within the book of Thoth. It says, "Open for me the well or nurse," same thing, "which unites with the wise ones, that I may drink from her sweet water." And the vulva, also a nurse, who is as a nurse for the learned one. May I enter in to her doorpost. Behold, my mouth is open. May one give it milk into my mouth, that she may her place before my mouth. I am thirsty, presumably for knowledge. Let me say to the nurse who sustains language, that I may nurse from her breast. These are all different quotes, and they have a surprising resonance and history, all to do with what you might call fluid transfer of knowledge, which is a big thing in later times in a thing called Tantra, and is obviously already important within the Egyptian tradition. Again, these bodily images. Something that's quite nice to note in all this talk of return to the womb, return to the source, a theme that met many times. These Hermetic and Gnostic views on the androgyny of God as well, that we find in on sexual intercourse as an image of an earthly realization, presuppose a fundamental equality of both sexes, of men and women. And that is, from the Hermetic tradition, something quite exceptional in the Greco-Roman world, certainly. So these are very, very radical ideas found in late Egyptian magic. Okay, so to finish, better have a finish. Because there's quite a lot there for everybody to absorb for our magicians, and there's a question of actually working this and making what sits. I thought I'd just end with a little bit from the same text from the Book of Thoth, which is a long hymn to Imhotep. Well, bit too long for me to read it all now, but I'll read you 10, 20 lines to finish off, to give you a taster, but also as a invocation and a blessing of Thoth and Imhotep and Sheshach. Hymn of praise. I praise God for you, O foremost one of the temple of Ptah, Imhotep. In the festival of Imhotep before Osiris, Nan-Nefer-Hotep, I will cause your name to live beside the living Ba. I will divinize your Ba before the Ba of his divine heart. A Hotep Dinesu offering to your Ka before the altar. A worshipping of your name before the sacred images. Come you, O one who lives as a craftsman of Istan. Praise one of the heart of Ra. May ye cause that you recite. I will praise God for you. I will cause that your name be rejuvenated. I will cause that your Ba enter before my Father. I am with you as an heir, like the son of a vizier in the land of my fathers. Your teaching will act as a nursemaid for me. You have captured me through the raising of the hand of one who created me. I have become an heir of your divine instructions. After I have become a son, let them cause my anima to be established. Let me enter among the nobles. Let them place me upon the path of the divine Bas. The wise ones who are in the primeval times. I will exercise self-control as a wise one. I will be like a statue. I will become one with the assistants. I have made the end of the funeral offering through pronouncing my name in the darkness while I fight with all the other Bas. My one pen for me the way of going and coming. Let me show the way of the path with my feet. Let me hurry to the ibis who is on the top of his bush. He who has ordered the earth with his measuring stick. Let me see the baboon who has joined with the snake. He who has judged the earth with his scales. May I proceed from the eclipse as a servant of Istan. I will make a glorification of the secrets of Thoth. May I enter therein, namely, the character of all the ibises, that I betake myself to the place of the serpent of Thoth, and may I see heaven.